Bonjour, mon ami. This is your host, Ryan Mckern. Thank you again for joining me as we visit one of New England's most haunted cemeteries in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to History of King's Chapel Burying Ground. The oldest graveyard in the city, King's Chapel Burial Ground, was established in 1630 as the final resting place of early Bay Colony settlers Isaac Johnson, the Land Johnson, who used the land as a vegetable garden. Explicitly asked for the burial in his pumpkin patch. Although he was the first interment, the land continued to be used as a gravesite, serving as only burial ground in the city for 30 years. Unlike recent funeral practices, the headstones and footstones of early burials were scattered randomly throughout the grounds, creating an uninviting atmosphere. This all changed in the Victorian era of 1837 to 1901, as cemeteries became attractive recreational parks. With new trend, the grounds were beautified, luscious greenery was incorporated, and footpaths were established, inviting folks to picnic in the field and stroll through the smoothly paved walkways. The issue with the visual upgrade is that headstones were rearranged and organized in neat rows, completely ignoring responding remains underneath. It is said that the mix-up was sparked with the mysterious happenings in this area. With a disturbance of graves, spirits left to wander eternally, unable to cross over. Today, only half of the headstones to over 1,000 people buried will have remained. This park cemetery, located on the central Tremont Street, preserves both the antique charm as well as the Victorian-era appearance, making it the ideal place for an immersive historical experience among all that its preserved gem has to offer. Stand out: Joseph Tapping and Elizabeth Payne. Could they be two of the souls that are haunting King's Chapel's burial grave? Joseph Tapping headstone. Near the entrance of the cemetery, unforgettable and beautiful in its own right, stands a Joseph Tapping headstone. The carved stone depicts the constant struggle between life and death, with a skeleton trying to extinguish a lit candle, and Father Time trying to... The artwork represents the fleeting nature of his life, as well as humanity's imminent end, possibly the most jarring gravestone in the entire cemetery. Elizabeth Payne headstone. The gravestone is significant not for its aesthetic or design, but for its role in inspiring Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter. The headstone reads, "Here lies the body of Elizabeth Payne, wife to Samuel Payne." This short phrase inspired Hawthorne to dream up his main character, Hester Prynne, a 17th century woman living in Puritan Boston who, after being accused of adultery, is publicly humiliated and forced to wear scarlet A. King's Chapel is home to the remains of some of Boston's most significant pioneers. Among these we find Mary Chilton, the first European woman to step a foot in the Massachusetts Bay, the first European woman to set foot in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and John Winthrop, the colony's first governor. It is also the final resting place of New World-shaping peer and destiny-rewriting Revolutionary War heroes, all of which are said to still haunt the cemetery today. Haunting King's Chapel Burying Ground. The Ghosts of King's Chapel. The Ghosts of King's Chapel Burying Ground. As the oldest cemetery in the city, it is no surprise that the King's Chapel stands out as one of Boston's most active paranormal locations. Many experience sudden chills, hearing disembodied voices, and being touched, grabbed, or pushed, although identifying the perpetrators of these strange occurrences have been impossible. Certain entities have been seen and heard by visitors time. The Tale of the Headless Woman. Often spotted in the westernmost portion of the cemetery, of an African-American woman roams the grounds. After her death, the carpenter who built her coffin had grossly miscalculated the measurements and made it too short. Instead of ordering the construction of an inappropriately sized coffin, The careless mortician decided to saw her head off and place it in between her legs. He made the body fit. The act was enough to cripple the woman's journey to the afterlife, and she has haunted the graveyard ever since. Another tale recalls locals often tell the story of a man who buried alive in King's Chapel during the early 19th century, which, believe it or not, was not an uncommon issue of the Chicago Tribune, discussing the chance of premature burial, but also acknowledging the plethora of exhumed graves that showed signs of activity, or rather a struggle, in the casket. You may have heard stories of the bells being placed in graves, with the strings tied around the corpse that went up from the casket through the ground and to the headstone outside of Warren Tavern. The uncomfortable discussion was prompted by an alarming number of premature burials reported in England, with a brief 6 if physicians were incorrectly pronouncing people dead during a peak time of medical advancement, like the 19th century. It makes us wonder how many was buried alive in the centuries prior, especially since King's Chapel was almost 300 years old by then. To make us shudder a bit, the newspaper article narrates the story of a woman who was conscious while being buried. Although she could not move, open her eyes, or speak, she was aware of her family members towering over her, weeping over their loss. While at the funeral home, her internal distress began to show outwardly, produced tiny beads of sweat that alerted her undertaker that she was still alive. At King's Chapel, however, the story is a bit more gruesome, as it does not describe how a premature burial was averted, but rather how a man was purposely suffocated underground. Legend buried alive by family members seeking ownership of his property. An old woman, certain of the ghastly deed, lost a group of people of the cemetery who collectively demanded the grave be opened. Upon doing so, the body was found to be indeed dead, but the fingernail markings proved that the man spent his last moments attempting to claw his way out of the narrow confinement. Nocturnal visions hearing muffled screams coming from beneath the earth. What is spine-chilling is that the sounds of the multiple voices pointing to the possibility of additional premature burials at King's Chapel. The Old World Cemetery lures both historian buffs and ghost hunters through its glades. Alike, the skeptics are also welcome, as the charged haunts are sure to change your mind. King's Chapel Burying Ground is managed by Historic Burying Grounds Initiative within Boston Parks and Recreation Department. Ground is open to the public from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. free of charge. Located at 58 Tremont Street, Boston, Massachusetts, 02108. We highly implore you to go visit these sites, as cemeteries are near and dear to my heart and some of the most beautiful places in the earth, spiritually and beyond. And thank you again for joining me on this another tale on the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan Mckern. Enjoy your October season, and I'll be seeing you very again soon. Au revoir.